In 1859, two of the most powerful militaries on Earth almost went to war. Warships were deployed, cannons were loaded, thousands of soldiers were put on standby, ready to fight, and the entire thing was triggered by a pig eating some potatoes. This isn't a joke, and it isn't an exaggeration for a thumbnail. It's one of the strangest, most real conflicts in modern history, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a single vegetable garden nearly caused a war between two global superpowers, and why somehow nobody involved actually died, except the pig. The pig definitely died. To understand how this happened, you have to start with a boundary line that nobody had actually bothered to draw properly. Back in 1846, Britain and the United States signed a treaty to settle their border in the Pacific Northwest. On paper, it looked simple. The border would run along the 49th parallel, then dip south through the Channel, separating the mainland from Vancouver Island. The problem was, there wasn't just one channel. There were two. And depending on which one you picked, ownership of a small cluster of islands sitting exactly between them, including one called San Juan Island, could belong to either country. Nobody resolved this at the time. Both countries just sort of let it sit there, which meant for over a decade, both American settlers and British colonists ended up living on the exact same disputed island, technically under two different governments, with nobody quite sure whose laws applied. Think about how strange that actually is. This wasn't some remote, forgettable rock in the ocean either. It sat in a genuinely valuable strategic position between two growing colonial powers, which is exactly why neither side wanted to simply hand it over without a fight. Two governments, both with functioning legal systems, both with armies, both quietly aware that a single incident could force the question nobody wanted to answer. Whose island is this really? You already know that's not going to end quietly. By 1859, San Juan Island had a strange, uneasy population. On one side, American settlers had moved in, farming small plots of land. On the other, the British Hudson's Bay Company was running a large sheep operation on the very same island, treating it as British territory. Two nations, one small island, no agreed border. This was basically a diplomatic powder keg with nobody assigned to watch it. Then, on June 15, 1859, an American farmer named Lyman Cutler noticed something eating his garden. A large black boar, owned by an Irish employee of the British Hudson's Bay Company, had wandered onto Cutler's land and was calmly destroying his potato patch. Apparently, this wasn't even the first time. The pig had reportedly done this before. Cutler had had enough. He grabbed his rifle and he shot the pig. Just like that, the most consequential vegetable-related decision in North American history had been made. The pig's owner was furious. And honestly, fair enough, that was a valuable animal. He demanded $100 in compensation, an enormous sum at the time. Cutler, insisting the pig had been trespassing on his land and eating his crops, offered $10. Neither side budged. And here's where things stopped being a neighborly dispute and started becoming something much bigger. British colonial authorities, treating Cutler as a British subject on British soil, threatened to arrest him and haul him off to face colonial law. American settlers on the island, horrified at the idea of one of their own being arrested by a foreign government, panicked and appealed directly to the U.S. military for protection. And this is where a dead pig somehow escalates into an international incident. The American general in charge of the region, William Harney, decided this was the moment to make a statement about American sovereignty over the island. He dispatched 66 American soldiers, led by a young captain named George Pickett, to occupy San Juan Island and establish a physical American military presence. If that name sounds familiar, it should. This is the exact same George Pickett who would later lead the infamous, disastrous Pickett's Charge at the Battle of Gettysburg just 4 years later. Before he became known for one of the bloodiest failed assaults in American military history, his job was standing guard on an island because of a pig. The British response was immediate and deeply out of proportion to a potato dispute. Within weeks, Britain had sent not one, but 5 warships to the waters around San Juan Island, over 2,000 British sailors and Marines. More than 70 cannons pointed at a beach occupied by 461 American soldiers with just 14 guns of their own. Picture that for a second. An entire naval fleet, bristling with firepower, facing down a small American garrison over an incident that started with a farmer defending his potatoes. For weeks, this standoff sat frozen, terrifyingly close to becoming an actual war. Both sides had soldiers in position. Both sides had weapons ready. Any single nervous trigger finger, any single miscommunication could have started a shooting war between the United States and the British Empire. So why didn't it? This is the part of the story that almost nobody expects. Commanders on both sides, independently, had been given the exact same quiet order. Hold your position, but do not, under any circumstances, fire the first shot. The British Royal Navy commander overseeing the fleet, Rear Admiral Robert Baines, reportedly refused a direct order from the colonial governor to open fire and land troops, allegedly stating he wasn't going to involve two great nations in a war over a pig. Whether that exact quote is verified word for word by historians is debated, but the underlying decision is not. He held his fire against pressure to escalate. On the American side, the standoff eventually attracted the attention of Washington, and cooler heads intervened before the situation spiraled any further out of local control. So for weeks, two heavily armed forces sat within sight of each other, cannons loaded, tension at a breaking point, and neither side pulled the trigger. Eventually, both governments agreed to something almost anticlimactic: joint military occupation. British and American troops would both remain stationed on the island, peacefully, until the actual border dispute could be settled through diplomacy rather than gunpowder. And if this sounds like a uniquely bizarre way for a near war to start, it isn't quite as rare as you'd think. History has a small, strange collection of conflicts triggered by almost comically small incidents. An 18th century war between Spain and Britain that historians later nicknamed the War of Jenkins' Ear, after a sea captain's severed ear became a diplomatic flashpoint, or a medieval Italian conflict remembered as the War of the Bucket, allegedly sparked by a stolen well bucket between rival city-states. The San Juan Island standoff fits into that same strange pattern. The trigger is almost laughably small, but the underlying tension it exposes, unresolved borders, national pride, unclear jurisdiction, was entirely real. That temporary arrangement lasted nearly 13 years. For over a decade, American and British soldiers lived on the same small island, reportedly visiting each other's camps, trading news and supplies, and by most accounts, generally getting along just fine, all while their governments back home debated who technically owned the land beneath their boots. The two camps even had names, and they still exist today. The British established what's now known as English Camp, and the Americans set up American Camp on opposite ends of the same island. Accounts from the period describe soldiers from both sides organizing shared social events, including holiday celebrations and even friendly athletic competitions between camps, which is a strange image to sit with. Two nations that had spent weeks pointing cannons at each other, spending the next 13 years occasionally challenging each other to sports instead. It's worth pausing on how unusual that actually is in military history. Most territorial disputes between empires in this era ended in bloodshed, sometimes over far smaller stakes than an entire island chain. This is one of the only examples of a serious international standoff quietly de-escalating into over a decade of two rival garrisons functioning almost like neighbors, because neither side ever received an order that made stepping back impossible. The dispute wasn't actually resolved until 1872, when both countries agreed to let a neutral third party settle it: Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany. After reviewing the original 1846 treaty and the disputed Channel question, the Arbitration Commission ruled in favor of the United States. San Juan Island and the surrounding archipelago officially became American territory, which means the entire conflict, the warships, the thousands of troops, the 13-year military occupation, ultimately produced exactly one casualty in the whole affair: the pig. No soldiers died, no sailors died, not a single shot was fired at another human being in anger, on either side, for the entire duration of the standoff. In the history of near wars between global powers, this might be the only one where the body count started and ended at one farm animal. And that's really the strange, quietly reassuring lesson buried in this story. Two empires came within a hair's breadth of war, armed with everything they needed to make it catastrophic, and the thing that stopped it wasn't a treaty, or a summit, or a clever diplomat. It was individual people, standing at the edge of that decision, simply choosing not to take the final step. The pig started it, nobody finished it. And maybe that's the real difference between an incident and a war, not how it begins, but whether the people holding the guns decide it's actually worth pulling the trigger.